What's up guys, it's Topsy, and here we are once again ranking all the SpeedDuel starter decks. For today's video, we're going to be covering Match of the Millennium. And if you didn't catch the last video, this is another one of those starter decks that works pretty much like this. Each of these starter decks is only going to have 2 characters in it, with each of these characters having a 30 card collection. And from that 30 card collection, they pretty much make 2 separate decks from that. So we're going to have to take a broad look at the collection before we break down each of these decks. Furthermore, as usual, we're going to be grading each of these decks based on the following criteria: the 20 card deck you're expected to play alongside its adjacent skill, the consistency of the deck, the overall power output, and of course just the quality of the cards within each of these starter decks. So with all that being said, let's get started. Alright then, so starting off the list, we have Yugi, and Yugi has 2 separate decks, that being the Gaia deck and the BLS deck. Let's see how this collection of cards looks like. Okay then, so taking a quick look at Yugi's monster lineup, we can see a lot of vanillas that are very iconic to us from the anime. Dark Magician, Gaia, Cursed Dragon, Winged Dragon Guardian of the Fortress, Beaver Warriors, Celtic Guardian, Silverfang, Giant Soldier of Stone. All these of course being classic Yugi cards, but all of them are pretty bad, and at that we have 3 not great tribute monsters. Cursed Dragon being only passable just because it's a single tribute monster, but Gaia and Dark Magician not being quite all that good. Of course, Gaia does get a pass because of one of Yugi's skills, but we'll get to that when we get there. Moving down to the effect monsters, things are looking a bit better. Charging Gaia the Fierce Knight is a great normal summon. Senju of the 10,000 Hands is a great card as well, just because if you're playing rituals, this is a good card to have. The Vindictive Magician is great removal, Karibo is cute, Magician of Faith is great, and Sphere Karibo is very nice and defensive. And lastly, for the monsters, we have BLS himself, and of course BLS isn't great. It's a ritual monster that's a vanilla. However, with the skill, it actually makes it quite an interesting monster, so we'll get to that in a later segment of the video. We now move on to the spell cards, and things aren't looking all that great here. Starting off, we have the Blackluster Ritual Spell and Polymerization. Of course, we understand why this is here, and Poly seems like a stretch given the Gaia deck. Moving on, we have Soul Release, which is an interesting card. Don't necessarily know why it's here, but okay. Spell Shattering Arrow and Twister are 2 interesting ways of removing back row. However, they both rely on destroying face of spell and trap cards, so that's a bit underwhelming. Spiral Spear Strike is a really cool continuous spell, especially with Gaia the Fierce Knight. Moving down some more, we have Summoner's Art, Fighting Spirit, and White Elephant's Gift. These 3 cards in particular I like quite a bit, also just because you can search out the Gaia the Fierce Knight and White Elephant's Gift. Given how many vanillas are in the deck, this is always great to see. So Goblin Circus is interesting. I don't necessarily know why you would be playing this, just because the effect is very underwhelming, and getting rid of resources in your deck is not great. I mean, I suppose you can get rid of any useless card at the bottom of the deck, but I'm not a huge fan of it. And Backup Squad is actually pretty good. I don't mind this card whatsoever. Just being able to gain some form of card advantage from taking damage is not bad at all. Lastly, we have the trap cards, and we have Spellbinding Circle, Magic Jammer, and Eliminating the League. Overall, I kind of like all 3 of these trap cards. Spellbinding Circle is just protection, Magic Jammer is another way of bypassing spell cards, and finally, Eliminating the League is a lot more situational, but the effect is not half bad whatsoever. It still is monster removal anyway. And I did lie there, Gaia the Dragon Champion is the last card in the deck, but it's Gaia the Dragon Champion. This card is just nothing to write home about. Alright then, so now it's time to break down each of Yugi's decks. So he has 2 separate decks, of course that being the Knight of Legend deck and the Ritual of Black Mastery deck. Each of these decks are tied behind their unique boss monster, in the Knight of Legend deck being Gaia the Fierce Knight, and for the Black Mastery Ritual deck being BLS. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Knight of Legend deck first. Starting off, we can look at the monster lineup, and damn, that is a lot of vanillas. Dark Magician, Gaia the Fierce Knight, Cursed Dragon, Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress, Beaver Warrior, and Celtic Guardian. Overall, all these monsters are really bad, as I mentioned already, so there's not all that much going for them there. Moving on to the effect monsters, there's a lot less, but they're pretty okay. Charging Gaia the Fierce Knight, Old Vindictive Magician, Magician of Faith, and Sphere Karibo. I don't mind those whatsoever. Once we move on to the spell lineup, we see that things aren't looking all that great here either. We have Poly, Soul Release, Spell Shattering Arrow, Spiral Spear Strike, Summoner's Art, Fighting Spirit, Goblin Circus, and Backup Squad. There seems to be a lot of useless fluff here, with cards like the Soul Release, of course, Goblin Circus. These cards are just not doing all that much in the deck. Even Poly, I would make an argument that it's not necessarily great, but you know, that's just me. As for the trap card lineup, again, the trap cards are not bad at all, with Spellbinding Circle and Eliminating the League. So at first glance, the deck as a whole does not look great, but how does the skill save the deck? Well, let's take a look. The skill that Yugi gets for this deck is Knight of Legend, and it reads, each turn, one Gaia the Fierce Knight you normal summon can be summoned without tributing. This line alone is huge for the deck, just because being able to just normal summon Gaia the Fierce Knight as a 2300 monster is huge. It's great. We have already mentioned how 1600 is like the base attacks that you need to have in order to be a decent normal summon during this weird starter deck format. So just being able to summon that monster that big with no downside is phenomenal. But let's continue. Apply the following skills while you control a Gaia the Fierce Knight monster or a Gaia the Dragon Champion monster. If it attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing damage to your opponent once per turn. If it inflicts piercing damage, draw 2 cards, then discard 1. Right off the jump, we can see another amazing effect. Giving your Gaia the Fierce Knight and Gaia the Dragon Champion piercing is an insane effect. But not only that, we're also getting a chance to draw 2 cards. This is ridiculous consistency as well. And finally, you can't activate set cards in this spell and trap card zone. It doesn't really matter. For the most part, you're not going to be worrying too much about activating your back row when you go ahead and do this effect. So it's a whatever thing. Honestly, as a whole, the deck does get saved somewhat via the skill itself. Don't get me wrong, the lineup of cards here overall is very bad, but we start understanding why certain cards are here, like the Goblin Circus. Giving yourself any chance to get access to a card like Summoner's Art or your Gaia the Fierce Knight itself is really good, just because you want to get access to those cards as soon as possible, because that's your whole win condition. And if you can just get rid of any of these vanillas you don't need, that's great. However, cards like Dark Magician just do not make sense here, just because they do absolutely nothing. And as I said, a lot of these vanillas are just very, very bad and underwhelming. But at the bare minimum, the skill is killer. You know what? The deck was better than expected. But what about the ritual strategy? Well, Yugi's ritual strategy, let's take a look at it. As we can see, again, we have a ton of vanilla monsters. As expected, we did have a lot of them in the collection. But what about the effect monsters? Well, for that, we have Charging Gaia the Fierce Knight, Seiju the 10,000 Hands, Old Vindictive Magician, Karibo, and Sphere Karibo. Nothing crazy, but as I said, the lineup of cards in this starter deck is just really weird. Moving on to the spell cards, we have the BLS Ritual Spell, Spell Shattering Arrow, Twister, Summoner's Art, and White Elephant's Gift. I do like the fact that they are being a lot more concise with their spell cards in this deck specifically, just because they're avoiding a lot of the fluff that you don't need. So that's really good to see. Moving on to the trap cards now, we have Spellbinding Circle, Magic Jammer, and Eliminating the League. Again, the trap cards are just fine, there's nothing wrong with them. But how does the skill go ahead and tie everything together? Well, the skill for this deck is Ritual of Black Mastery, and it reads, activate this skill during the main phase, while you control BLS or Black Magician of Chaos, that you ritual summon this turn. While you control BLS, it can't be destroyed by your opponent's skill. Okay, that's an interesting way of protecting it. Once per turn, if your opponent activates a trap card, draw 1 card immediately after it resolves. So that's a pretty cool effect, being able to just draw a card each time your opponent activates a trap. However, it is very situational just because it has to be a trap card, so you're gonna have to do this very late during a duel. We don't necessarily need to read the effect of Magician of Black Chaos just because, well, it's not in this deck, so it seems kind of pointless. In my opinion, this deck is somehow worse than the Gaia deck, just because, for one, summoning BLS is not that easy. It's a large ritual monster that not only requires the ritual spell, the ritual monster, and tribute fodder that equals level 8 or higher. At that once you summon BLS, you're not doing all that much with it, as opposed to summoning Gaia, which is just, if you see him, you just normal summon and you already boon the effects from being able to do piercing damage and drawing once you do that. The comparison it's just non-comparable. It's just non-comparable. Alright then, so if I had to rank the Gaia deck, unfortunately it doesn't make it into A tier, but I do think that it makes it somewhere in B tier, maybe even C tier. No, I think it's B tier. At the bare minimum, it is easy to summon Gaia. You do have ways to search it with Summoner's Art, and you do have other normal summons with charging Gaia, so yeah, I think it's like a low B tier. As for BLS, well, this deck is just really bad as a whole, and I think it's like somewhere low in D tier, possibly F tier, but we'll leave it in D tier for now. At least you can still do stuff in this deck. Not much, but you can do stuff. So that is, wow, that's quite upsetting to see actually. Holy shit. Okay, well, let's move on to Pegasus now. Alright then, so we can take a look at Pegasus decks right here. We have, it seems to be a Toon deck and a 1000 Restrict deck. Alright then, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at Pegasus deck now. As we can see, we have a ton of Toon monsters here, like Toon Alligator, Manga Ryu, Toon Barrel Dragon, Toon Buster Blader, Toon Dark Magician, Toon Dumb the Skull, Toon Mermaid, Masked Sorcerer, Gemini Elf. So that's a lot of Toon monsters. And at that, we have a lot of like interesting ones like Toon Dark Magician, Buster Blader, and Toon Barrel Dragon. They're not half bad at all, with Toon Dark Magician being the best one of them all. The quality of the toons is significantly better than the last time, but it's still fair to see whether or not they're any easy to summon. Moving down some more, we can see some other interesting cards in this deck. Cards like Illusion Faceless Magician, the evolved form of the vanilla, Sonic Bird, Dijin Prognosticator of Rituals, and Dijin Discerner of Rituals. The Dijin card's always great to see for any ritual-based strategy, and Sonic Bird as well for any ritual-based strategy. Illusion Faceless Magician is, it's an interesting card. However, I think it's far too situational in order to be any good. So, you know what, it's only okay. If we move down some more, we can also see Relinquished. I've already said how I personally really like Relinquished as a card. It's a very powerful monster, especially as a boss monster, so that's really cool to see here. Onto the spell cards now, and there aren't that many. We have Black Illusion Ritual, Toon World, Toon Table of Contents, Toon Rollback, and Fulfillment of Contract. As a whole, the spell lineup isn't phenomenal. The best one being by far Toon Table of Contents. Just being able to search your deck for any toon is insane. The others are Toon World is bad, Black Illusion Ritual, it's a ritual spell, and Fulfillment of the Contract is just premature burial for a ritual monster that was properly summoned. Which isn't bad, but still you do still need to perform the ritual summon. Once we move on to the trap cards, we have some interesting cards here. We have Toon Mask, 7 Tools of Bandit, Dust Tornado, Shield Spear, Security Orb, and Skill Successor. As a whole, I actually am a huge fan of all these trap cards. Starting off with the Toon World, I think Toon World is a pretty cool trap card just because it allows you to sometimes cheat out a Toon monster from your hand or your deck under the guise that you control Toon World and your opponent controls a monster. Under certain circumstances, this can allow you to summon some of your better Toon monsters, but under others, it doesn't really do much because you're summoning some of your weaker ones. But nevertheless, having access to this card is always great. As for 7 Tools of the Bandit and Dust Tornado, these two cards are great. Significantly better than Yugi's backup removal. Spear Shield is it's nice, nothing to write home about, but it's nice. Security Orb is a very interesting way of protecting yourself during a duel, and at that, it has the added benefit of being able to just destroy a monster on the field when it gets destroyed in the back row, so that's pretty cool. I like the versatility of it. And Skill Successor, a better version of Shield and Spear just because it has a dual effect where it can give you attack when it's activated or while in the graveyard, so that's awesome. No complaints with the trap card lineup for Pegasus. And last card for Pegasus, of course, being the 1000 Eyes Restrict, which, as I've mentioned, is a great boss monster. Really powerful. So if you can enable this, that's insane. Honestly, in my opinion, from the broad look, Pegasus seems to have a significantly better card lineup than Yugi, especially when it comes to spell and trap cards, and the quality of some of these Toon monsters is great. All we have to see now is whether or not they're easy to summon. Okay then, now it's time to take a look at both of the decks for Pegasus. So we have the 1000 Eyes Spell deck and the Toon Mayhem deck. Alright, so let's go ahead and break them down. As we can see in the 1000 Eye deck, We have a couple vanillas here, nothing to write home about as usual. But for the monster lineup, we have Double Masked Sorcerer, Gemini Elf, we have the Faceless Magician, Sonic Bird, and both Dijins. Alright, a respectable effect monster lineup, and of course, Relinquish being the last monster here. As for the spell lineup, we have Black Illusion Ritual, Toon World, Polymerization, and Fulfillment of Contract. As I've already mentioned, the spell lineup is fairly lackluster for Pegasus, and at that, we don't even have the Toon Table of Contents here, so that's, I mean, at least it's not the main selling point of this deck specifically, but still, it would have been nice to see for some level of consistency. As for the trap cards, we have 7 Tools of the Bandit, Dust Tornado, Shield Spear, Security Orb, and Skill Successor. Honestly, the only questionable trap card here is the Shield Spear, just because if the point of the deck is summoning Thousand Eye Restrict or Relinquished, you're not necessarily activating this card against your opponent, so that's the only reason I'm like confused about it, but it's whatever. As a whole, the deck doesn't look all that bad, it looks okay, but how does the skill hold up? Alright then, so the skill Pegasus gets for this deck specifically is Thousand Eye Spell, which reads, activate this skill during the main phase. Once per turn, you can discard one card and use the following skills, but you can't conduct your battle phase this turn. One of them is Ritual Summon 1 Relinquish from your hand by tributing monsters from your hand and or field whose level is 1 or more. Also flip this card over. That's a really nice effect. Being able to just bypass needing the ritual spell and just getting right to summoning Relinquish is very, very nice. 2. Fusion summon 1000 Eyes Restrict from your extra deck using monster from your hand and or field as fusion material. Also flip this card over. So yeah, honestly, this effect, both these effects are great. Just being able to get access to either your Relinquish or your 1000 Eyes Restrict by just via skill is a phenomenal effect. And kind of goes to question, why do we have the Relinquished and or Polymerization in this deck if the skill already pretty much fulfills this by itself? So the skill for the deck is actually great. Just being able to perform the ritual summon or the fusion summon is very, very powerful. However, I do have my gripes with this deck. First one being, we ended up getting Sonic Bird as opposed to Senju, and that doesn't make all that much sense. If the most important part of this deck is getting access to Relinquished, then why give us Sonic Bird, which gives us access to its ritual spell? Honestly, if Senju was here, this would make the deck significantly better. Also, as I already said, the addition of Poly and Black Illusion Ritual seems a bit redundant since the skill already does that and significantly better than both of these cards do. This is some of my biggest gripes with the deck as a whole. Moving on to the quality of the monsters, as I said, the cards aren't bad, but they don't really do anything for you as a whole. Most of your Toon monsters require Toon World in order to attack at all, and at that, your Dijin cards are just support cards that don't do much on the field. And your vanillas, they don't even have respectable attack stats. So, as a whole, the best qualities of the deck are the skill and the trap card lineup. That's a bit rough. But what about the Toon deck itself? Alright then, so taking a look at the Toon deck, we have only one vanilla monster, that being Toon Alligator. That's a great start, honestly. In addition, we have Manga Ryu, Toon Barrel Dragon, Buster Blader, Dark Magician, Summon Skull, Toon Mermaid, Toon Masked Sorcerer, and Toon Gemini Elf. Alright, well, I do respect the fact that there is nothing but Toons in this deck. Well, I spoke too soon. We also do have Relinquished here. Relinquished is great, but it feels weird being in the Toon deck itself, given how Toon heavy it is. Moving on to the spell cards now, we have the Black Illusion Ritual, Toon World, Toon Table of Contents, and Toon Rollback. Again, very Toon-centric. And for the trap cards, we have Toon Mask, 7 Tools of the Bandit, Dust Tornado, Security Orb, and Skill Successor. As a whole, I think the Toon deck is constructed very well. It is very Toon-centric, as I said. However, the big issue with this deck is that summoning out these Toon cards is not easy. Not in the slightest. But let's see how this skill fixes that. Alright then, so the skill's name is Toon Mayhem and it reads, the first time Toon World in your spell trap card zone would be destroyed, each turn it's not. Well shit, this skill is not great. This skill is actually horrible. And let me explain. First off, you only have one copy of Toon World in this deck, and at that, you only have one way of searching out that dedicated Toon World. And to top it on top of that, most of these Toon cards, if not most of them, but a good amount of them can't even be summoned if Toon World isn't already faceable in the field. Meaning that under certain scenarios, you're going to be sitting there like a sitting duck doing absolutely nothing because you can't summon your Toon monsters. Honestly, I feel like this deck itself would have benefited significantly from the original Pegasus skill from the last starter deck he was in, where the skill pretty much just activated Tomb World via skill. That would have been a significant boon to the strategy and could have actually made it fairly reliable. But as it stands now, this is bad. That's very disappointing. Tunes is a really cool and interesting strategy, and this is just not it. But now it's time to grade each of these strategies. And I'm gonna keep it a buck with you guys. These were both very, very disappointing. Honestly, I think this deck probably goes in like top of D tier, only because, well, not even top of D tier, maybe like middle of D tier. Just because while the skill is great, you still need to get access to both either relinquished, you need relinquished regardless in order to summon it, and that's not the easiest thing to do, especially in this deck. And for the fusion summon, again, you need the 1000 idol and the relinquished, so that stuff like that is just not going to be happening often. The saving grace is the fact that relinquish is an easy monster to summon, so it outclasses this deck right here. As for the Toon deck, somehow this deck is worse than the original Toon deck, just because summoning out your Toons is so difficult that even though you have significantly better Toons in this strategy, you're not getting them out. You're just kind of gonna lose to your opponent because you can't attack them. So wow, I was not expecting the tier list to turn out like this. Alright guys, as usual, let me know in the comment section below, do you agree with my classification of each of these decks? Do you disagree? Do you think I rank some of these decks too high, too low? Let me know in the comment section below. Guys, if you did end up enjoying today's video, please leave a like and subscribe for more content. That's very much appreciated. We're super close to 300 subscribers and that's super exciting. So huge thank yous to you guys. In the description below, I do have a link to this tier list if you guys want to give it a try on your own, and if you do end up making it, then feel free to tag me on either Twitter or Instagram to show me your results. I'd love to see them, maybe even showcase them on a future video if you guys are interested in that. But as usual, I've been Topsy. Thank you so much for stopping by and have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.